So I think we can start. Once again, thank you very much for waiting. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It is my pleasure to welcome you today at our first virtual event. We really appreciate your time, especially knowing that there is a lot of virtual events happening recently. So everyone battles for your attention. That being said, my name is Philip Gregor. I work for Billigence as a customer success manager, and it is my pleasure to do the introductions to today's webinar. So today's webinar is a virtual take to our otherwise face-to-face meetup series, in which we bring together professionals working in the data governance field and data analysis field in general, together to discuss their experience, challenges, and solutions to those challenges. Really, it is an open forum for people to just come together and openly talk and discuss about their experience implementing data governance and working with data governance in their organizations. So today's webinar is called Tools and Techniques to Implement Data Governance. So aside for the actual definition of what the data governance is from the spectrum of different professionals, we'll also have a look at the implementation of the data governance tools and experience with the implementation of data governance tools across different types of projects and different types of organizations. So for those of you who don't know, today's webinar is organized by Billigence. Billigence is a data analytics and business intelligence company that works in Sydney with offices in Singapore, London, Prague, Frankfurt, and San Diego as well. We help our clients understand their data, leverage the insights from those data, and help them improve their business and processes. That is across the data preparation, visualization, predictive modeling, and data science, and data governance areas. With me today, I have two of my colleagues, Graham Pearman, Billigence Principal Data Governance Consultant, and Saravan Kumar, Collibra Solutions Architect. With that said, I'm going to hand over to Graham, and he will start with the actual presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, and it's a real pleasure to be here this evening. So data governance, being in the CDAO Brisbane earlier this year, there's clearly a lot of interest in data governance from organizations wanting to understand more about what actually data governance is and how they can become better at it. I actually have the pleasure this evening of providing you with a brief presentation about data governance and some of the practical advice and kind of insights into that. What we wanted to do this today was give you something quite interactive. So we're attempting a fairly new type of technology for presenting this information. It's kind of like, for those of you who know Blue Peter, it's kind of like, here's one I did earlier. So just about half an hour ago, I recorded my presentation, and you'll see why shortly. So I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen. I picture the scene in 2004 in London on a sunny day, if you can believe it or not. A young entrepreneur called Steve Coast was cycling around the parks of Regent's Park, and he had with him what he described as a puck-sized GPS and a laptop. His objective was to map the cycling paths of London. He formed a company called OSM, or OpenStreetMaps, and fast forward to 2020, OSM now has 2 million participants providing data and mapping information. During the 2010 earthquakes in Haiti, the most complete digital map of the local roads, hospitals, triage centres and refugee centres was built by volunteers in OSM. Some contributors are professional cartographers, others are just cyclists and enthusiasts. Mr. Coast realized that the model he'd built could only function if the data governance behind it worked as well. And OSM works on one single yet very powerful concept, and that is that the data is the product, not the map. When we think about data governance, we often think about audits, breaches, regulation, and it can feel quite boring. I wanted to share this story with you because it reminds us of the positive role that data can play in our lives. OSM worked because it got the elements and standards of data governance right early on. My name is Graham Pearman. I'm the Principal Data Governance Consultant for Billigence, and I just want to spend the next 10 minutes speaking with you about some of the concepts of data governance and how we think that these can be improved in your organization. So what is data governance? Well, the best way for me to explain data governance is to say that it's a journey. The organization has to evolve through this journey. It can go at varying levels of speed, it can get stuck, and it can even go backwards. And it's important to acknowledge that an organization's data governance is a reflection of its people, its processes, and its technology. It must be considered in relation to its organization maturity and how it manages information as well, and that's something that we'll be covering shortly. This diagram covers 3 types of data governance maturity. Data governance 0, i.e. there's no or little organizational-wide data governance. Data governance 1, typically this is an organization that controls the risks associated with breaches, has appointed stewards, governance committees, and so on. And then we have a data governance 2.0. This is where we would place OSM, because data is being both protected and optimized, but crucially there's efficiency and the data is achieving the objectives of the organization. Organizations living data governance 2.0 are the ones that can quickly extract reliable data and knowledge to make informed decisions. So what's the challenge? This year, a seasoned veteran of data governance, John Ladley, authored the 2nd edition of his book, Data Governance. And within this, he gives a rather grave indictment of modern organizations' ability or lack thereof to manage data. He goes on to state that most companies are unfit for data. If we consider that we know that the world's most valuable resource is no longer oil but data, it's somewhat surprising, therefore, that so many companies are seemingly forget their approach to governance all wrong. So what constitutes a good approach to data governance and the data governance journey? Well, that's quite involved, and we look forward to covering more of these topics in future sessions. What I've done for today, though, is picked out a case study from the Enterprise Data World 2017 conference, because I think it details the evolution of this journey, almost kind of from beginning to end, and it's really insightful. The link, which is provided here, which we can send to you afterwards as well, is accompanied by a 40-minute video by a lady called Laura Tellman. And the key things that I would pick out from the journey that Laura shares with us are this. They get these things right, so they have a working definition of what data governance is to their organization, and from that they're able to set a vision. Data governance will be the guide that transforms data and provides trusted quality information that supports our decisions and actions. They also have leadership from C-level decision makers. They have SMEs who are accountable for setting policies and standards. They have structure and accountability, and they also have a maturity model for information management. In fact, they use 4 of them. They finally, they are able to kind of raise the tacit level of knowledge about data governance within their organization. They teach their staff the language that's used in data governance, and they encourage the team to feel comfortable about using that terminology. I'm now going to kind of go across and talk a little bit more about IMM, and it's something, again, it's covered in Laura's presentation. IMM is both distinct from and intrinsically linked to data governance. The best way to think about information maturity management is it being a means to measure the progress and effectiveness of your data governance efforts. The main objective of assessment activity is to understand what the organization does with the content and information that it's producing. There are, as we say, lots of different models out there, kind of ranging from externally validated ones to ones that you can do internally. And I just want to make a couple of points about IMM. And the first one that I would say is that we should always be thinking about ongoing measurement, baselining and measuring our maturity. I've included here something from ITIL CSI, just a reminder really about, or we can think about Deming cycles, but organizationally, how we're thinking about continually measuring where we are on our IMM journey. And the second thing that I would say is, again, it's from Mr. Ladley, is that quite importantly, what he says here is an assessment shouldn't be done to answer the question, do we need data governance? An assessment should be done to determine how far we need to improve things. At this juncture, I just wanted to kind of reflect on some of my own personal experiences and thinking about, what are the things that can be done straight away really easy when we think about how we handle and manage data day to day. The first thing I'd say is think from an organizational perspective about what matters most from a data perspective, whether this is a large kind of enterprise layer within your organization, or if it's actually something more within your own team. So as an example, when I was working with Deloitte in 2016, we were an internal client service, IT service, providing IT and mixture of business delivered services. One of the big problems we had is that we knew about all the services out there, but we didn't know how important they were. So it was hard to prioritize incidents, understand our kind of SLAs and so on, and how to and when to raise major incidents, for example. So one of the things that our head of the business relationship managers did is he went out and started speaking to the business, and he come up with quite a rudimentary list of 17 services, which quite shortly came to be known as Tom's list. Well, a year and a half on, Tom's list had evolved into a list of 51 services that we had a golden source of truth about, including who was involved in providing them, the OLAs, the SLAs, all of the configuration mapping and so on. But the point here is that we went from something, that was a very small iterative start to actually something that was making a big organizational impact. The second thing I would say is make the data matter. So again, I've been involved in quite a lot of different projects and organizations where most people day to day doing their day job, working with transactional data, doing data entry and so on, quite often they don't really understand, or they've not kind of appreciated how important what their role is to the organization and how important it is to kind of get the data right. I think just simply by communicating, even if it's to say, this data matters, or thank you, or the organization, this is how the data that you work with is helping the organization, has a really big impact on people's motivation and understanding of why that data is important. And the last thing I'd say is, it's a very simple housekeeping rule, is always use unique referencing. So quite frequently, or think about the number of times you worked in a large organization perhaps, and someone sent you a list of people's names without any staff ID or unique reference number, such as an email address, and you are then kind of scrabbling around trying to determine who that user is. who that John Doe is out of the 10 different John Does in your organization. Implementing data governance means making people behave in a different way, or introducing a new way of working that they've not done before. So therefore, one thing that I'm going to touch on really quickly is the consideration of change and organizational change management. If you need convincing about OCM, just kind of got this quote here from the study done in 2014, which showed that organizations undertaking effective change management programs are 6 times more likely to achieve their objectives. And in kind of thinking about the kind of point of OCM, I kind of, again, reflecting on some of the pitfalls that I've seen where it doesn't quite work that well. And I would say this, OCM can't make inherently poor changes or incoherent changes good. And likewise, if you have really good kind of warranted changes that are kind of no-brainers for your organization, it still means that you need OCM. I would say as well, sometimes there's an expectation that you perhaps implement a change or a new system and then you do the OCM afterwards. And again, I would kind of caution against that. I think it's important to engage early on. The other thing that I see sometimes is people fail to understand the urgency of the change. I've seen kind of many examples of this where a new tool is purchased. But then it's, when you ask, why is this being implemented? Is it because you want to avoid data breaches? Do you want to become more profitable? Do you want to become X times more efficient? I think it's really important to understand that message from an organizational perspective. The last one I would just say is that sometimes as well, there's kind of division or lack of cohesion between project management and OCM. And I think the two need to continue, they need to really work closely with one another to be effective. I couldn't really talk as well about OCM without mentioning leadership. And again, referencing this 2014 study, it almost sounds cliche, but without senior sponsorship, the OCM is going to be very limited. So again, this is a challenge to the leaders of you out there to think about how you're helping to be a leader of change within your organization, especially from a data governance perspective. My colleague Saravan, who's here with us today, is going to be doing a demonstration of data governance tooling. Therefore, I'm not really going to delve into this too deeply. What I would say, though, is the following things. A data governance tool without data governance will not solve your problems. And it's possible to achieve high levels of maturity without a tool. However, that's fairly unlikely in our experience. And I'm now going to go across to my colleague, Saravan.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Saravan here, and I will be talking about, my experience so far working in data governance projects. So this is the agenda for today. Firstly, we'll dwell into the data governance challenges, where we'll touch upon on different aspects of data governance, and finally we'll jump into the basics of Calibra, and we'll talk something about the Calibra implementation. So talking about the challenges, these are the areas that we will cover. So every data governance program starts with a business use case. So we'll talk about how to pick a business use case, and for the business use case, how do we identify the key focus areas? And once we have the focus areas in place, putting together a data governance operating model, and then the execution of the model, and we'll jump into the adoption. Most of the time what happens is you roll out a tool, but people don't know how to use it, or they are not aware of what are the value that a data governance tool can bring in. So we'll talk about how to get adoption. And finally, we'll touch base upon how to report on the data governance maturity. So to start with the business use case. So this is, whenever you start a business data governance program, the first thing that comes into mind is a business use case. And while creating the business use case, you have to define, okay, what the business use case is about and what value the use case is going to bring. So ideally, what happens is a data governance use case falls into two different categories: the defensive one, or else it's an offensive one. Defensive are mostly the regulatory driven governance programs, such as APRA regulatory reporting or BCBS, etc. And the offensive one is more to dwell into increasing the productivity or improving the data quality, or governing your data warehouse or a data lake, etc. So the most important thing here is, when you pick a business use case, always pick from both the ends of the spectrum and have a good mix of the use cases so that you get a broader coverage. So that is about the use case. So once we have identified the use case, now we'll jump into the focus areas for the use case. So in order to implement the use case, what are the different areas that we have to focus on? So this is something, if I pick, suppose in this example, we will be talking about a regulatory one. So for regulatory one, the idea is to identify and regulate all your critical data. So in order to classify the critical data, you have to first create a critical data element register. The critical data element register will store all your data elements, and those data elements will actually link to your critical regulatory reports. Now, the regulatory reports will be stored in a report catalog. Report catalog is more like a library where you maintain all your reports and your report attributes, and you can also have owners assigned to the reports. Now that I have my report, what I want to do is, for a particular regulatory report, I want to identify which systems are involved in producing that. So in order to know that, there are two important things that we need. We need the system inventory, and then the data dictionary for each of the system and how the transformation happens. So in order to have that information, we will have to configure the data dictionaries. So that is about the report catalog and how the report is produced, what are the different systems involved. So once we have that, we want to also overlay that information with risk and controls. What are the key risks that have been identified for that particular report, and what are the controls that we are applying for that report? And the other aspect is from the data quality perspective, where we also want to track, okay, what are the data quality rules applied and what are the business rules they affect. So after we have identified the key focus areas, we will move into the operating model. So here is an example of the data governance operating model, where we have, the data governance organization, and we define all the different roles and responsibilities, which is at the topmost level. And in order to drive the operating model, we have the stewardship process. So here again, if you see the stewardship process, we have the focus areas that we have identified, like the data element register, report catalog, system inventory, etc. And finally, the last piece is on the data management aspect, which is your data dictionaries, data integration, etc. So the idea is, we have to come to an agreement on the data governance operating model, because this becomes the framework of executing your data governance program. Another important thing that we have to talk at this point is setting up your data governance organization. So, the data governance organization is, we generally have it at 3 levels. One is your strategic, where you have a CDO team. There are different names for this team as well. In some organizations, they call it at CDO, or it can be EDM, or it can be Information Management, Center of Excellence, etc. And this team will be again classified into a lot of sub teams like data governance team, data quality, data management, and the tooling. The strategic team has to align with the tactical teams, which are the group data offices team, and each business unit will have its own group data office team. And here we will be we will be mostly interacting with the data stewards from the different and the domain stewards from all the different business units. And we will be engaging directly with the GDO office teams, and we will be enabling and empowering them with what are the data management, data quality, and data governance principles and how to implement them. And the last layer of this organization is the BU specific or the operational teams, which are generally the application teams within each business unit. And those are the teams which will actually drive your governance program ahead. So that's about the data governance organization. Now we'll just touch base upon your data lineage operating model, because this is again pretty essential, and there are 2 flavors to it. If you see, there is the business lineage, or some organizations they implement it as a technical lineage. It's important to pick your operating model before you commence with the data governance program, because each of these has its own benefits as well as risks. So your business lineage is mostly driven by the logical level, where you take a data element and you build up the lineage based on the data attributes or the logical data dictionary, while the technical lineage is mostly driven by the physical metadata, where you talk about the schema table column level information. The business lineage is, the difficulty with business lineage is you will have to do a lot of manual mapping, while with the technical lineage, you can actually do some kind of a automated harvesting. A lot of tools, they provide different connectors to automatically harvest the technical metadata. And the value, if you see, the business lineage is more business friendly, and people who are report owners or who dwell with the report can easily figure out, okay, what their flow is, while the technical lineage is mostly for the technical audience who, go and extract data from different tables and, join them and bring them together to produce the report. So the disadvantage with business lineage is there is a lot of manual effort involved. And for technical lineage, the catch is, you cannot harvest all the system metadata. There are applications which do not support harvesting, like we cannot harvest XML files, or we cannot harvest, Java code or Spark code such as. So in those instances, we will have to do some metadata stitching. A caution here is, when you're picking up your lineage operating model, you cannot do a partial implementation of business and a partial implementation of technical lineage. It is too dangerous. Based on the different use case, either you just have to stick with technical or you just stick with the business lineage. Now that we have gone through all the different operating models, we will jump into the execution phase. And in the execution phase, what we want to do is, before we go into a big bang approach and apply it across your entire organization, it's very important that we start small. We pick, 20 to 30 different CDEs with 5 to simple and medium reports, and we try to build them in the data governance tool. And once we have those reports, and we can start building up their data dictionaries, the system inventories, etc. And as we go through the process, you will know for those reports what are the challenges you're coming across. So while doing that, you can also formulate your best practices of what to do and what not to do. And you can also learn about, okay, what are the different automation mechanisms you can apply. And wherever you cannot automate, you are the places you should be building workflows. And we have to be also very cautious about building the workflows, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel of some of the functionality that can be done within the tool. And once we have tried out for the simple and medium reports, then what we can do is we can scale up the model that we have established. So the next thing is adoption. So for adoption, we have now tool. We have done a bits and pieces of work with the tool while executing a simple example. It's very important that we communicate that to all the GDO teams and the extended application teams. And in order for the adoption, we have to establish a communication plan. We have to establish lots of different working groups, such as the data governance working group, data quality working group, where we can share, the different use cases, and also what are the experiences that we have had. And moreover, what we can do is we can also build some use cases which are very specific to a business unit. That will help realize the business unit, okay, this is my problem in my area, and this is how we can solve it using governance. So after the adoption, now what we want to do is we want to, measure the maturity of how well we are doing. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to have some reporting done over the solution that we are trying to deliver. And here we will have to establish some KPIs and reports. And some of these metrics that we can look at is the number of CDs that have been approved so far, the number of reports that has been certified, the number of controls that have been assured, etc. And these metrics, we can track it on a monthly basis to see where we are at and how the adoption and the practices across the organization evolve. So that was about the challenges with data governance. Now we'll jump into the Calibra implementation. We'll touch base upon some of the basics of Calibra. So if you know, Calibra is a collaboration platform. It's more like a crowdsourcing tool where you can bring in information or metadata from lots of different systems, and you can try to find value and from connecting them. So that's about the platform. And Calibra is very business driven. So, most of the data governance tool in the market, if you see, their approach is mostly from a technical user perspective. But Calibra has a different approach. They are more driven from the business metadata side of things. And Calibra organizes information in community and domains to store the metadata. The next important thing in Calibra is the asset and relations. Asset is nothing but anything which stores data or metadata becomes an asset. You can have a data asset, you can have a technology asset, etc. And you connect different assets using relations. And the relations is the most powerful aspect of Calibra. Okay, we will go through an example to see that how it plays out. And then Calibra is very flexible as well. So this is like one of the biggest strengths. We can, expand the meta model of Calibra to include other customizable features or, assets within the model. The other striking thing about Calibra is you can build out workflows to operationalize your stewardship model. And finally, just recently, Calibra has also rolled out the Calibra Insights, or a reporting layer where you can track the data governance maturity of your program. So here we have an example of the Calibra Metamodel. So this is how the Metamodel looks like. So the blue box that you see is like, the business asset, which will store your business assets such as your line of business, business term, etc. Here you have a technology asset domain, which will store information about system and databases. You have the governance asset, which deals with risk, controls, etc. And then you have the data asset domains here for the logical data dictionary and physical data dictionary. So here in this example, you're just seeing a specific part of the Calibra meta model, which has been drawn out, but this is a big extensive piece where you will have other assets and other domains as well. This has been just drawn out for dealing with some specific examples, which we are going to see next. So this is an example of how the Collibra assets and lineage work. So we have a report, which is the comprehensive credit review report here, and it has different report attributes, account name, account number, etc. And this is how the report lineage looks like. The report is produced from a system called Mars, and Mars receives data from Jupyter DW. And the data transformation is captured within the mapping specification. So back, 5 years back, if you look at, this could have been achieved by a metadata management tool, which generally produces a technical lineage. But what Calibra brings to the table is you can add additional business metadata onto it. Like here, I'm talking about the data element. We can link up the critical data elements to the reports and the report attribute. We can also, integrate the risk and controls into the lineage and say that, okay, I have a particular data risk for this particular report, and in order to mitigate that risk, this is what this particular control has been applied. And it can also be extended to include your data quality rules and the business rule. So here we have an example where we are checking for the data quality of the account date of birth column and how it links to the business rule. So this is where, Calibra becomes really powerful. You can bring in other information and relate it to your reports and the technical metadata. So that is about Calibra. Before I finish off, I just wanted to highlight some of the most important things that we have to consider during the data governance journey. It's always important that we start small and flush out a framework before we go on a big bang approach. And we should be focusing on some practical use cases which will help us drive the program. And initially when you start, it's always good to get the broader use cases and then go into the details of it. And finally, promoting data culture. Whatever tool you roll out, it is very important that we promote a data culture among your extended teams, and you enable and empower them to use the data governance tool. That's it from my end.
So thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Saravan. As mentioned before, we had this little interactive session in place. So we've collated the information that we've got from you, and my colleague Graham will walk you through the outcomes, through the results, and they will all together with Saravan discuss their own experience and how does it match or reflect yours. So,
thanks, Philip. I'm just going to present some of the feedback, some of the points we had. So what do we have here, though? Against technology, question here or around how do we choose a tool that's good value for money? Against people, we have some things here around how do we get the kind of tacit level of knowledge up within our organization? How do we get people to actually start using data governance tools? And in process, what options are there for converting complicated workflows into a tool? And I guess that means, you know, where you've got lots of fairly kind of complex processes within your organization, how much does that kind of take to kind of convert into workflows? Just kind of reflecting on those, perhaps maybe I would invite Saravan to kind of give some insight around the workflow question.
If you see, the workflows are generally of 3 different kinds. One is where you propose different kind of processes or, you know, different kind of assets. The next would be, you know, workflows for approval.
Yeah.
And then finally workflows for change.
Okay, let's put it another way. Have you come across any workflows where you've not been able to put them or convert them into a data governance tool?
Like, we can break it down,
yeah,
and probably implement it in smaller chunks. If it's a complicated piece of thing,
yeah,
it's always better to break it down. But you know, again, it is a very generic thing.
Yeah.
And difficult to answer until you, you know, look at a particular workflow and see how it is.
Okay. I mean, perhaps I might try and tackle some of the people-orientated points on here. So in terms of the kind of people's utilization of data governance tools, I mean, clearly we're reflecting on the kind of OCM piece. How can we, familiarize people with those tools and kind of really communicate the urgency and the need to actually use those and why it's important for the organization. Clearly, kind of training and upskilling is an important consideration there, familiarization. But also, I think something I've seen quite well in kind of tool adoption is reward as well. How can we, and I don't necessarily just mean financially, I mean, you know, by acknowledging the work that people are doing within, you know, job descriptions or their roles and responsibilities, or in their kind of end of year reviews, or even just, you know, communicating to the organization to say, hey, Saravan added like 500 new assets this week. Great work, Saravan, you know, and really just try to kind of communicate that you know, that kind of behavior is good for the organization because it's what the organization is trying to achieve. In terms of how to get the kind of knowledge levels up to certain levels, I think, you know, obviously it's a iterative process, and it takes time to kind of do that. But really, I think one of the key thing is around, you know, the example that we saw from the kind of medical practice in terms of familiarizing people with the kind of data governance language, but also kind of sharing these insights into how you can kind of better manage data day to day. Did you have any points as well?
Yeah, like in this area, you know, what we could do is we can focus on creating data governance champions who belong in the business unit or the group data offices who interact with their application teams. So it's all about, you know, having a regular session or working group meeting with them and empowering with them, okay, you know, these are the different best practices that you need to follow. These are the new terms that are used in data governance perspective. So once they get used to it, they can train their own team and their, extended team as well. So it is a journey. It's not like, it has to go through constantly. Yeah.
And then we have one here around technology, around how do we choose a tool that's good value for money. So I guess if we're talking about value, we're talking about the kind of cost benefit ratio, right? And I don't know, Philip, do we still have any colleagues from Collibra on the call? I was just wondering if they might know. I'm guessing what they probably would say is that a good data quality data governance tool will help you mitigate some of the key risks around things like data breaches, which can be very expensive, and also bring in a lot of efficiency in your ways of working. So I guess the answer there is that data governance tools can be fairly expensive investments. But the idea is that they give you kind of return on investment, A, by mitigating your risks, B, by making you more efficient in the way that you work. Would you kind of echo that, Saravan, in your?
Yeah, and it also depends on, what is the scope of work, as well as what is the size of the organization.
Yeah.
There are lots of factors that we have to consider before you go and pick and choose the tool.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for all your valuable and interesting inputs and insights. Ladies and gentlemen, all attendees, thank you very much for being with us today. I sincerely hope that this session was truly interesting and that you found what you were looking for. Any feedback will be highly appreciated, and also we will be sharing the webinar recording with you later on. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for being with us today, and see you next time.